A starving species has no reason to bury anyone. Every hour spent digging is an hour not spent eating. Yet tens of thousands of years ago, someone knelt down anyway and started digging. Not for food, not for safety, for a body that would never move again. That single choice raises an uncomfortable question. Did our ancestors fear death? Or did they fear something worse? Something with no name yet. No one wrote it down. No diary survived the Ice Age. But something else did. Bones, graves, choices buried in dirt for 100,000 years. And those choices are still talking. If you listen closely enough, death wasn't rare in that world. It was background noise. Predators hunted at the edges of every camp. Disease arrived with no warning at all. Winter picked off the weak. Every single year. A hunting party could walk into the trees at dawn, and only half of them walked back out. You'd think that made people numb to it. It didn't. Humans don't get used to absence. Not really. One missing voice changes the whole camp. A single empty space by the fire feels enormous. Picture it yourself for a second. You wake before sunrise. Mist sits low over the valley. Someone who sat beside you last night is gone. Not missing. Gone. Would you stop feeling that after the 10th time? Or would it hit harder every time? Most researchers now think the second one is closer to true. Here's the problem archaeologists run into constantly. Fear doesn't fossilize. Grief leaves no fingerprint in stone. So they don't study emotions at all. They study behavior, because behavior survives. And one behavior shows up again, and again, and again. Ancient people didn't always leave bodies where they fell. Some were moved. Some were protected from scavengers. Some were placed in the ground on purpose. That single fact should stop you. Every calorie in that world was precious. Every hour of daylight mattered. Digging into hard, frozen ground with a stone tool takes real effort. It can take an entire day, and still someone kept digging, kneeling in fresh earth with numb fingers, while a child stood nearby, watching quietly. Nobody in that scene knew what came next. Nobody does, even now, but everybody there felt something, and that feeling might be older than fire. Some scientists argued this started for practical reasons. A body attracts predators. Decay spreads disease through a small camp fast. Burying the dead protects the living. That much makes sense, at least on the surface, but practicality doesn't explain everything archaeologists are finding. It doesn't explain careful positioning. Bodies curled gently, like they're sleeping. Doesn't explain the ornaments placed beside them. Doesn't explain people coming back to visit years later. So what were they actually doing? Here's where it gets stranger. Not every body received the same treatment. Some were clearly, deliberately buried. Others were simply left where they fell. Why the difference? Did some people matter more than others? Or did the way someone died change the rules? If you've got a theory, I'd genuinely like to read it in the comments. Nobody has a clean answer yet, and every new dig only adds more questions. But one pattern keeps repeating, and it's the key to everything. Some skeletons show injuries that should have been fatal. Bones that broke and healed completely. Limbs that were crushed and recovered. People who lost teeth and kept eating for years. A badly injured hunter can't chase anything. An elderly person can't always gather food alone. And yet, somehow, they survived. Someone fed them when they couldn't feed themselves. Protected them when they couldn't fight back. Slowed down. In a world with almost nothing to spare. That's not survival instinct. Survival instinct doesn't explain feeding a person who contributes nothing. This is something else entirely. Call it compassion. Call it love. If the word doesn't feel too big, either way, it left a mark in the bones. So here's the real question. If a community cared that much while someone was alive, what happened the moment they stopped breathing? Did that care just vanish, or did it keep going? Here's where the story stops being simple. Because we weren't the only humans doing this. Another species walked the same earth. under the same sky, hunting the same animals, and burying their own dead. They were called Neanderthals. For most of the last century, they got dismissed completely. Slow, brutish, barely more than animals, according to the old story. That story is falling apart fast. Neanderthals controlled fire with real skill. They built sophisticated stone tools. They brought down animals many times their size. And the evidence keeps pointing somewhere darker and more tender. In a cave in northern Iraq, archaeologists found a skeleton. One arm, gone. Partial blindness in one eye. Serious hearing loss. Old, healed leg injuries that would have crippled him. He couldn't hunt, could barely gather food for himself by any cold survival math. He was a liability. He should have been left behind within days. Instead, he lived into his 40s, old for a Neanderthal. Someone fed him for years, kept him warm, chose again and again not to let him die. Not because it made sense, because it was what they did. And when he finally died, his body wasn't just left in the open. It was placed carefully in Tegrun. That single grave changes an enormous assumption. Grief, ritual, even burial itself might not be uniquely ours. Another species may have asked the exact same questions we do, long before we existed to ask them. There's one discovery from that same region that became world. Around a Neanderthal skeleton, researchers found traces of ancient pollen. For years, the story spread fast. A Neanderthal funeral, covered in flowers. Tens of thousands of years before flowers meant anything to anyone else. It was beautiful. Almost too beautiful. Later research complicated it. Burrowing rodents may have dragged that pollen underground themselves. No flowers required. The debate is still open today. That's what good science actually looks like. But here's what the flower controversy distracts from. Even without a single flower, that burial is still extraordinary. Someone prepared that resting place on purpose, chose not to leave that body out in the open. Cared enough to act. Picture standing inside that cave yourself. Cold limestone walls. Torchlight shaking against the dark. The smell of earth and old smoke. A face you knew, completely still on the ground. Predators moving somewhere out in the dark, beyond the entrance. Would fear make you run? Or would something stronger make you stay? That choice might be one of the oldest human questions there is. Then there's the red. Some ancient graves are stained with ochre, a bright red mineral. It colors the bones and the soil around them. 2. Ochre doesn't occur naturally at most of these sites. Someone had to travel to find it, then carry it back on purpose. Nobody accidentally paints a body red, and nobody knows exactly what it meant. Blood? Maybe. Life? Maybe. Something we don't have a word for anymore. But ask yourself this: would you spend a whole day decorating someone who will never see it? Practical survival never demands that kind of effort. The human mind, apparently, always has, and it gets even stranger than paint. Some graves contain tools. Real tools, carefully made, buried instead of used. Some contain ornaments. Others hold objects carried from hundreds of miles away. Every one of those items had real value. Burying them meant losing them forever. Why make that sacrifice? One explanation is simple. The objects belonged to that person. Keeping them felt wrong, somehow. But there's a deeper possibility hiding underneath that one. Maybe the living believed those objects still mattered after death. Sit with that idea for a second. You don't pack supplies for a journey that doesn't exist in your mind. No skeleton can confirm that belief outright, and no fossil can rule it out either. The evidence just sits there, quietly, refusing to resolve. Now here's the discovery that stops most people cold. Some of the most careful burials ever found belong to children. Tiny bodies, laid down with real, deliberate care, sometimes surrounded by hundreds of small beads. Each bead had to be collected by hand, pierced one at a time with a sliver of stone, strung together slowly by patient fingers. A child that young held almost no practical value for the group. No hunting skill, no labor, nothing the community needed to survive. And yet someone spent hours preparing that grave anyway. Nothing about that effort was efficient. Everything about it was meaningful. Try to picture the person doing it, threading bead after bead, in complete silence. Not for a celebration, not for status, for goodbye. Every knot probably felt heavier than the last. That kind of grief doesn't need written language. Only evidence like this. And here's the detail that might be the strangest part of all. Some of these graves were visited again, not once, multiple times. Across different seasons, people returned to the exact same spot, years apart. They remembered where it was. That means the dead weren't simply removed from the community. They stayed part of it, in a different way. A grave wasn't an ending. It was a place you came back to. Take a step back and look at everything together. Disabled people kept alive for years, at real cost to the group. Children buried with more care than some adults ever received. Graves people returned to again and again for generations. That's not the behavior of a species barely holding on. That's the behavior of a species that had already discovered love, long before anyone figured out how to write the word down. So, go back to the real question. Were ancient humans afraid of death? Almost certainly, yes. Predators were real. Hunger was real. Loss was unavoidable, no matter how careful anyone was. But fear alone doesn't explain any of this. Fear doesn't dig a grave for a child who can't fight back. Fear doesn't decorate a body no one will ever see again. Connection does. Burial didn't stop someone from being gone. It turned that absence into something people could carry, not a promise that life continued. A promise that memory would, and that distinction might be the most human thing on this entire list. Think back to where this started. A hungry group, spending an entire day digging a hole for someone who would never eat again. That choice never made sense. As pure survival, it only makes sense as something closer to love. Maybe that's the real story hiding under all of this evidence. Not a species learning to fear death. A species learning it couldn't let people simply disappear. So, here's what I actually want to know from you. Do you think burial started from fear? Or do you think it started from something closer to love? Because archaeologists are still genuinely split on this. Every new grave they uncover shifts the argument again. Every skeleton adds one more piece to a puzzle. Nobody's finished. If any part of this changed how you picture our ancestors, you're already doing exactly what archaeologists do every single day, asking better questions than the ones you started with. Ancient people kept coming back to the same graves, year after year. Subscribing is how you find your way back here. 2. Tell me in the comments which detail actually got to you. The flowers, the child's beads, or the man who lived for years with almost nothing left to give. Because tens of thousands of years later, someone still remembers he existed. And that, more than anything else, is the whole point.